Welcome, everyone, to Monday Match Analysis. I'm Gill Gross. Carlos Alcaraz is Monte Carlo champion in 2025. His season is back on track, dare I say. The transition to clay serving him well as Alcaraz wins his first big title since Wimbledon last year, regains world number 2, passing Alexander Zverev, continues his stellar track record in big finals, majors and Masters 1000s. He is 11-1 in such finals, which is remarkable. And if you look at the run he's had on the clay, the last 3 clay events, they've all been big ones. Roland Garros title, Olympic final, Monte Carlo title. So he's built some momentum, maybe not in the larger picture, but certainly on this surface, he's on actually a great run here, sneakily. Interrupted, of course, by the end of the clay season last year. Beats Lorenzo Musetti in a final that was really awesome for 2 sets. Disappointing, anticlimactic third, which we will get into. But I also do want to talk about some big ideas here, like reasons why clay or ways in which clay helps Alcaraz. Going to talk about his drop shot and why I think it's most dangerous on this surface. Some discussion about Musetti's return style and why it's not necessarily ideal against Alcaraz. And some good stuff coming in here. I appreciate everybody waiting a little bit longer for this edition of Monday Match Analysis. I was celebrating my mother's birthday, which some of you may have seen on my YouTube post. Thank you for all of the really sweet, kind messages to my mother under that post. I did tell her about them, and she appreciates, and I appreciate the birthday wishes. And that's the main reason why I'm so late. But also, oh my goodness, did I have a travel nightmare again, back-to-back weeks with flights getting delayed and stuff. Anyway, actually, last week it wasn't flights, it was something else. But let's get into it. As I mentioned, third set of this final was not ideal from a viewership standpoint, as the physical run that Lorenzo Musetti had in Monte Carlo caught up to him big time. Hard to tell how much of it was wear versus acute injury. Clearly, there was a portion on his body that he was certainly favoring, which was his hip flexor, I believe, on the right side. But there was also a lot of crampy body language in there, and he started hitting the legs, and it just, you could almost see a little bit at the end of the second set that things may have been going a little bit stale on Musetti physically. You came into this final concerned about Musetti's gas tank, considering he went 3 sets in 4 out of his 5 matches coming in. And he played Alex de Minaur, one of, if not the most physical player on tour right now, in the semis, a match that went 2 hours, 38 minutes, third set tiebreak, and he didn't get a day off. And the final was pushed up earlier due to rain. It's hard to imagine all of that didn't come into play with what ended up happening to Musetti in the third set, where I believe 2 points into the third is when we first saw severe and obvious signs of physical deterioration for the Italians. So the suspense that existed coming into the third set quickly disappeared. On the Carlos side of things, he might feel good about how he played in the third set regardless, because of what happened at the Australian Open, when he did have, for a portion of time there, a compromised Novak Djokovic, and let his level drop based on what was happening on the other side. In this match, he did not allow his level to go down with Lorenzo's at all. Alcaraz was squeaky clean in the third set and really was exemplary in how he responded to, I guess, taking care of his own game despite a compromised opponent. Was Musetti probably in even worse shape than Novak? Yeah. But I feel like that's something that Alcaraz should be patting himself on the back for. Now, because the third set went how it did, in hindsight, the start of the second set was the key to this tennis match. A huge feature of this entire Alcaraz run, by the way, was great second sets. Opening round, he lost the first set to Francisco Cerundolo, so this was his first set of the tournament. And he got back on track with a 6-love second. He lost the opening set to Arthur Fils and responded with a 7-5 in the second against Feast, winning at 6-3 in the third. Against Lorenzo Musetti, he lost the first set 6-3 and responded with a 6-1. So not only did he come back with big seconds or winning second sets, he had a couple of dominant ones, which had him really feeling good going into the third. But I want to point out a couple of things that happened here at the start of the second set because it did end up being the most important part of the match. Looking back, the only way Musetti was going to win this final is if he got off to a lead in the second and won this thing in straights because he did not have the gas tank to go 3. Well, after Alcaraz held serve in the first game of the second set, by the way, Musetti had some decent chances in this opening return game that I felt there were a couple of points that I thought were a little bit wasteful, including a passing shot that he probably should have executed at 40-30 to get that game to deuce. But Alcaraz holds serve, and after the change of ends, obviously not a full sit down, but a changeover, he goes over to his towel box, and he had a good laugh. There was a pretty long back and forth conversation. At the end of that conversation, somebody had jokes. I don't know if it was Carlos. I don't know if it was somebody in his camp. Somebody had jokes because they had a good laugh before this Love 1 game. And Alcaraz has always stood out for smiling a lot on the court. He has always stressed its importance. Recently, we haven't always seen it a ton. And if he were up a set and playing well in this match and he were, having a little laugh, I wouldn't have thought much of it. But because he was a set down in a big final, playing badly up to this point, the fact that he was still relaxed enough to smile in that moment to me was notable. By the way, whoever had jokes in the box, it was not Juan Carlos Ferrero, because now for a second time in a row this year, just like Rotterdam, Sam Lopez was acting as Carlos Alcaraz's primary coach. I think, it is unfair to draw any major conclusions from that, in my opinion. But if that pattern continues, like if this continues to happen, where, vibes aren't great and there's negativity and some confusion and some bad feelings and, all of some of the stuff we've seen for Alcaraz mentally when Juan Carlos Ferrero is in the box, and then Sam Lopez comes along, and every time it's Sam Lopez, Alcaraz wins the title, that'll get Carlos thinking. If that continues, JCF might have a problem. So you had the smiling ahead of this Love 1 return game for Alcaraz. He did break Musetti's serve. And there were some technical beauties in this game that are worth looking at. In particular, spectacular soft skills for Carlos Alcaraz, which are just so necessary against Lorenzo Musetti. I just think he is a wonderful defender in every possible way, Musetti, really off of both wings, particularly on clay. So even if you're Alcaraz, and look, Carlos has the muscle, if he really has it dialed in off the ground, to muscle the ball through just about anybody in any conditions. But maybe not reliably, and certainly not on a day like this where, frankly, he wasn't fully locked in. Certainly not at this stage in the match. So, point is, Musetti is so difficult to hit through. His defense is so stout. It often takes something either a little bit creative or something that utilizes the full geometry of the court in order to find a way through or around Musetti's defenses. Talked about this a lot with Musetti's opponents. So I have a couple of great examples in this One Love game where Musetti actually goes up 30-15. Alcaraz missing a forehand drop shot at 15-all, which was a rarity, which we'll talk about. But Musetti goes up 30-15 and actually hits 2 terrific defensive balls. In tennis, however, usually great offense beats great defense. Usually that's the case. That was the case here. These are 2 points that I will show on YouTube. At 30-15, Musetti with this excellent backhand slice defense that he is so proficient at, gets this ball to drop down low. He gets it basically low into Alcaraz's backhand, where you'd think, for the most part, he has defended himself into safety on this next ball. He has taken away all of Carlos's options because it's not going to be easy for Alcaraz to drive this ball with any sort of aggression. But the one area of the court where Musetti does leave a bit of a vulnerability is with this backhand drop shot down the line, which Alcaraz reads and executes so gorgeously here. 30 all. Carlos with a more forceful point here on the approach. But he's not really able to close the net here. He's expecting maybe to get a floater or a softball. Musetti cracks the running forehand, and Alcaraz has a low backhand volley from very deep in the court. This ball, with the pace that it comes in and how low it comes in, most players are going to float this volley. Most players are going to get handcuffed by this volley. Alcaraz drops it short for a drop volley winner on his backhand side. This was such a nicely played backhand volley. So again, if you're going to beat Musetti's defense, it's going to take an extra shot, first of all, and that extra shot might require you to take away the depth on the ball and finish with something like a drop volley or a drop shot. These are the most reliable ways to finish against Lorenzo Musetti because he loves to drop back deep and defend. Alcaraz is so good at it. So he kind of got back to full flight after this game. Carlos started to play. He played a really good second set, and he ran away with it. Let's talk a little more about Alcaraz's drop shot. Very relevant here. I don't think it was a huge factor in the Musetti final, but in the entire Monte Carlo run, it was really big for Carlos. Hugh Clark, in his terrific newsletter Thread of Order, noted that Alcaraz had gone 35 out of 41 when attempting the drop shot this week. I don't know if that was after the match had gone final against Musetti or if that was at some point in the second or the third set. But you get the picture. That is an unbelievable win rate on the Alcaraz drop shot. And I think it's one of the biggest reasons why Carlos gets a little bit of an edge on clay and even on grass court. And it's a shot that just isn't as effective on hard court. And I think it's worth going through the reasons. And by the way, Alcaraz isn't the only one. And it's actually two women who I think come to mind when I look at this dynamic. It's look, at the end of the day, there aren't that many players who feature the drop shot as a really prominent part of their game. For most players, it's a change up, it's a mix up, it's an occasional. But for players where the drop shot is a real cornerstone of how they attack, think about Marketa Vondrousova, think about Ons Jabeur. Those are two players. You can make a great argument for both of them that their best surfaces are clay and grass, their worst surface is hard court. You can make that argument for Alcaraz as well. And what do they all have in common? The drop shot is crucial for all of them. Let's cover our bases and start with grass. Why is the drop shot a good option on grass? First of all, I think there's a traction issue. So when players make that initial break forward for the drop shot, sometimes it's a little bit slower, a little slower to accelerate because of the traction issue on the surface. You also get the dead bounce, which makes the ball bounce twice faster. On the clay, you get deeper average court position. Traction sometimes could be a slight factor, but not as much. It's mostly the deep court position. Players play on average from further back in the court, which opens up some extra space in the forecourt where you're attacking with drop shots. Plus the court surface tends to grip backspin well, which actually makes the ball bounce twice shallower in the court. It takes to the backspin, which reduces the depth further. And ultimately, those are the two signs of a good drop shot. You want the ball to bounce twice quickly, and you want the ball to bounce twice as close to the net as possible. Grass and clay, in their own ways, each help make that happen. Hard court, you get none of those advantages. You have maximum traction. You don't have the deep court positions. You don't always get the extreme grippiness of a court to take your backspin, and you don't get a dead bounce. You sometimes, obviously it varies based on the court, but you're not really going to get that nice dead grass court bounce. That's why it's hard to drop shot on hard court. And I think that and the extra time on the forehand are the two main reasons Alcaraz becomes more dangerous on clay as compared to the other surfaces. The other thing is the serve return dynamic does help Alcaraz on clay. Or I guess I had that backwards. Clay helps the serve return dynamic for Alcaraz. Not only because his best serve is a kick serve, not only because his best returning is when he's deep in the court and he takes fuller swings oftentimes. I actually think you could challenge that in some ways, but it's also because the serve return dynamic in some ways is de-emphasized, which helps Alcaraz because it's not a part of the game where he generally creates his advantages. But anyway, I think furthermore, and to highlight this even more, Musetti's return style is very clay courty, and it's not ideal against Alcaraz. I don't think it bothers him much. Now, why is Musetti's clay return style effective in general? And the stats will flesh this out. It's highly effective. The way Musetti returns, he stands deep in the court. He gives himself time to take a full swing, and he usually puts a lot of height on the ball. He drives the ball high and heavy, and it gets him to neutral a lot. 1, his returns tend to go on the court at a high rate. 2, his returns tend to push opponents back into a neutral position where they cannot attack because they're too deep in the court to attack. And 3, the extra height gives Lorenzo some extra time to recover his position into the middle. When a great defender gets to recover into the middle, it becomes even harder to finish against them. So that's why Musetti's return style is great. Not a criticism of that. But is it a bad matchup for Alcaraz? I would argue yes, because Carlos's first forehands are not rushed. Alcaraz produces forehand damage from positions that others cannot. In other words, the heaviness that keeps him from moving up in the court, keeps everybody from moving inside the court. That's not a problem for Alcaraz. He doesn't need, with his heavy wattage on the forehand, he doesn't need to move inside the court to do damage off of that wing because he's in that highest possible weight class, which just reimagines his options as far as where he can attack from. So in that sense, I don't really think the high heavy ball necessarily does a great job at neutralizing Alcaraz. There's also room for Carlos to attack with the short angle on the first ball. And then we also saw serve and volley mixed in there. Always more effective against deep return position. First ball drop shot, always more effective against deep return positions. Alcaraz not only has these options, he's mastered these options. I liked the looks that Alcaraz was getting behind his serve. I thought he was getting good attacking looks, and that if he was able to play clean, this match was going to be on his racket. Yes, it can be said for most Carlos Alcaraz matches, but compare that to so many of the opponents who Alcaraz has perhaps lost to recently and what they've done. It's been the polar opposite. He doesn't get a look at that first shot. He's rushed on it. He's defending on it. And he's basically not allowed into his own service point. Musetti it's not his style. It's not his return game. I don't know if he can take the return early with his backhand. At least I know he can chip it, but can he drive the backhand return taking it early? I don't know, but it's just not what he generally does. In my view, the deep return position, the fact that Alcaraz isn't rushed, which will be increasingly the case on clay, that just makes everything more comfortable for him. And we said he won the first set because his high rate of returns in play, his baseline lockdown, was rewarded with Alcaraz errors. And Carlos had his wild level swings throughout this tournament. Unforced errors in this final through the first 5 games of the match were 12-1. And I do think Musetti did a great job here, to his credit, of playing very unpredictable patterns. Just did not see a lot of cross-court trades from Musetti in this match. It never looked like Alcaraz knew where the ball was going next. Didn't allow him rhythm. Didn't allow him to really get comfortable with the rally patterns. And that's something that Musetti does extremely well. Nonetheless, Alcaraz was a loose cannon. The unforced errors were pretty wild. He couldn't recover in the first set. And then once again, he started the second really well, which we got into. Usually, the further into a match Alcaraz gets, the steadier it gets. That's a good pattern. And there is some freight train dynamic with Carlos Alcaraz. The further he gets into a tournament, the further he gets into a match, the better he seems to get. And we saw this throughout Monte Carlo. He's not good in first sets. Doesn't cost him. He wins the title. And we've seen it in his career as he is, again, 11-1 now in big finals. Hope you enjoyed. Don't forget to subscribe. I'll see you next time.